Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us, Michael Herklots.
How are you?
Very, very well. I
Good,
couldn't
good.
be happier. How about yourself?
We're making the best of it. I've got a backyard full of snow, but other than that, we have our health, we have our happiness, good cigars to smoke, and good friends to enjoy them with. So I'd say I'm a lucky man.
I couldn't agree more. Mr. Herklots, like myself, you are a drummer at heart. You're a professionally trained drummer. And I was very curious if your journey were a drum beat or a specific rhythm, what would that be or sound like? Is it a blues shuffle, a funky jazz pattern, or a heavy 16th note groove?
Man, well, first of all, let me say I was really excited to hear your background over some of these conversations where you've been able to be interviewed, because I was really, no, I shouldn't say shocked. I'm not shocked at all, but I was really just very interested in just how similar our paths are, our sort of pursuit of passion and the ability to kind of pivot as necessary. If my life were a drum beat, what would it be? God, I don't know, man. I think it would have to be, um, it would have to be the opening prologue to a Broadway show, where you get a little bit of every tune just before the curtain goes up. Um, that is what my life has been like, certainly for the last let's call it 14 or 15 months. Historically, I think it would probably be just a little bit more swing like in general. That tends to be how I like to go through my life. But certainly the last 12 months have been just so different and so unique, and so many things happening all at once, that I think I would have to equate it somehow to theater, where you get a little bit of everything.
I can only imagine what that feeling must be like. The challenges of the pandemic, still a rather thriving cigar business, though, and then the heartbreaking closure of Nat Sherman and the iconic Townhouse. In retrospect, how do you think about these moments now, and how does it feel like? Is it already like far and distance and memories of days long gone? Is it still very near to your heart? I mean, now with the new chapter of your life, Ferio Tego, um, you are up to a totally fresh start, and everything's sort of starting anew. But how does that feel to you, and how do you relate to that personally?
I think it's kind of like anything where what's current is really the pulse of your day to day. And then when you look back nostalgically at things, there are certain moments, certain experiences that feel like yesterday, and others maybe that were more recent that seem like an infinity ago. Um, when I think about my transition from Davidoff to Nat Sherman, there is a piece of me that still feels like that was not that long ago. It was 9.5 years ago. But there's a piece of me that still feels very connected to my time at Davidoff, and so it feels rather current. But then again, I think to the last time I sat down face to face at the Nat Sherman Townhouse and enjoyed a cigar with one of our customers, and it feels like a lifetime ago.
Mm.
Um, it's it really depends on the moment, how it ultimately resonates with me. But certainly if I bucket it in sort of um, themes of moments, the work related to trying to execute a successful transaction. Um, we started that in October of 2019, and just thinking about that whole process from October 2019 through the first quarter of 2020, then pandemic hits, and now we're starting to work from home and still work through this process and try and do the deal. It just seems so long. Like that whole period just feels so long, that now I look at the last, whatever it's been, 2.5 months since my last day, November 15th, and that has just rocketed by, because every day now has been filled with excitement and forward-thinking work. I think the work to close was not forward-thinking work, and so
Mhm.
each conclusion of every day did not provide that same level of moving forward, moving forward, moving forward. And so now every day is has so much forward thinking and planning and organization and excitement that days are turning into weeks and turning into months, and it just it's very, very, very exciting.
Do you rather feel in a startup kind of mode right now, building everything with a new and fresh set of eyes?
What's very strange about this experience is, although Ferio Tego is, of course, a startup, our company is a startup, this brand Ferio Tego is a startup. At the same time, we are propping up a portfolio of legacy brands that I feel like I've kind of restarted 2 or 3 times now in over my Nat Sherman career. And so there's almost this bit of deja vu, where I feel like I've done this before, trying to get our orders together, trying to get our pricing together, trying to figure out our route to market. We did it early on with Nat Sherman. We did it after Altria's acquisition of Nat Sherman. We did it with our rebrand in 2018. So it's almost like I've done this before, and so I feel very comfortable with the work that needs to be done.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm also feeling, to be honest with you, Reinhardt, a bit impatient. I really want to get this done. I really want to get these products back in market, and I'm so excited to launch Ferio Tego. That piece is really the most exciting piece that resonates from a startup perspective. Is bringing something that is new, that's also mine. I've been in the business 21 years, but always as an employee. And to now really be a principal of a small family business in the premium cigar world is quite an exciting thing.
What's interesting about that is, at some point in my life, I certainly realized, if you have that entrepreneurial vision or that gene of entrepreneurial thinking in your blood, I believe there's hardly any way around it. And you will at some point end up doing exactly that. Do you feel the very same way, and that you actually had that in you? Or was that always sort of a long-term vision to at some point build your own?
So I think we can probably relate to this. But as a musician, you must be entrepreneurial. It is very rare that people are banging on your door begging to pay you to play drums.
Mhm.
That, maybe if you were a piano player or I don't know, a harpist or something, people are knocking on your door. If you are a jazz drummer, there are very few people going out of their way to call you and offering to pay you. So there's certainly that deep rooted self-promotional entrepreneurial, how do I get a gig, how do I think differently, how can I book my band here or there, or latch on to this player. And so I think that that type of entrepreneurialism is a different breed of entrepreneurialism versus the sort of serial entrepreneurs that they open a restaurant, then they sell the restaurant, then they open a consulting company, then they sell the consulting company, then they open up a spa. Those types of serial entrepreneurs are incredible, but I'm not that breed of entrepreneur. And so what I feel so grateful for over the years is that I've been able to apply my entrepreneurialism as an employee. And I think that has really served me well, certainly with my 9 years with Davidoff, my 9 years to follow with Nat Sherman, that my approach was entrepreneurial for and on behalf of an owner. That's a very cool opportunity, especially my work with Nat Sherman. Um, but I don't feel underprepared now, um, going into this as a full entrepreneur. Um, I don't feel underprepared. I feel like the last really 20 years as an employee in the premium cigar business, and my last, call it, 25 years as a working drummer, um, I think it's really created that unique opportunity, unique skill set to be able to really apply everything and let it come full circle.
That's a very interesting aspect that you mentioned. And I believe what it all comes down to is your purpose and why you want to build something as an entrepreneur. And when you mentioned that that analogy from the music world, and in particular as a drummer, you also have to make things work and bring everything together to be that bridging agent almost that ties all the members of the band together. And for me it was also the hospitality aspect, where the purpose of everything that you do is really to welcome other people, to host them and invite them into your ecosystem and your world. Now I believe with everything that you have done in terms of cigar retail, whether it was in Boston or with Davidoff, that also had a very hospitality-ish connotation to it. Would you say that working in all these different areas and parts of the industry and looking at the cigar world from those various angles was quintessentially important for your professional evolution and also for your personal journey?
There are a lot of commonalities, I think, that overlap when you're looking at the diversity of music, the diversity of hospitality and retail, certainly cigars. I think of premium cigars within the tobacco ecosystem the way I think of jazz in the music world. And I suppose a similar parallel in hospitality would be, a small cocktail bar in the context of, the greatest steakhouses. In that, someone who loves music, who considers themselves a lover of music, may in fact not truly appreciate what jazz is without having just a bit of understanding and education to then truly appreciate the art. I think the same can be applied in hospitality, and it certainly applies to the premium cigar world. What I feel has given, I don't know if I'd say it gives me an advantage, but I think it gives me a unique perspective, is starting and focusing in jazz, I think allows you to go wider as a musician than starting in mainstream rock and then trying to learn how to play jazz. In the context of hospitality, when you know how to do the smallest, finest, most intimate thing, I think it's easier to turn around and broadcast that in wider, more mainstream hospitality. So I think, again, it gives me a unique perspective, um, that has allowed me to apply a very specialized set of experiences and then to turn around and broadcast them to a wider audience. I love playing rock, but I play rock on a small jazz kit, and it doesn't make me play softer, and it doesn't make it feel, less awesome. But there's also there's a certain gracefulness to the way I play rock that's maybe different than a regular rock player. I'm kind of applying that same thing here now, venturing out on my own, um, with having tasted these sort of unique, different experiences, to now turn around and finally broadcast it widely. Um, it's I think all of those experiences will certainly pay out.
I believe a lot of our viewers are familiar with your story and how you got into the industry, starting in Boston and then the Davidoff move. But I'm curious, and please elaborate on your past experiences as much as you like. But what I'm curious is, with everything you just said, how did that plug into your move to New York City and when you started with Davidoff, where you had that stage set already with a large audience and that quintessential New York lifestyle that was going on all around you? But did you have that very same thought back then as well?
Time and place. So when I moved to New York, I moved with a band. I knew I always wanted to live in New York, so I was moving regardless. Fortunately, I moved with at the same time as a lot of my peers that were in this particular band. We all moved at the same time, so we all were performing together and playing together. Um, what they did during the day to make money, I really don't recall. I was fortunate that I had this other hobby, really, in retailing premium cigars in Boston. And the gentleman that was running the Davidoff store on Madison Avenue in New York City, I knew from a cigar shop in Boston. So I was quite fortunate to get that opportunity to work retail at the Davidoff store. I do remember, particularly when I first moved, almost being a bit self-conscious that I had this what could be perceived as a day job career, that in some ways, was I already selling out and not giving myself a chance to really work as a musician. But in hindsight, I worked a lot as a musician in those early days, and a lot of my decisions where I started putting more and more chips into the center of the cigar table, so to speak, they were very deliberate decisions. So it's not as though I failed and had to find something else to do, but rather I kept saying yes to every opportunity. I'd take vacation to go on tour and play with a band, or I would adjust my schedule in order to get studio time. So now in hindsight, I realized that I really did take a lot of steps moving forward in the musical, professional music opportunities. But the more opportunities I said yes to in the premium cigar world, God, they were just incredible opportunities. I was traveling more, I was engaging more. One of my favorite examples, when I was working at Davidoff, a Berkeley classmate of mine, I think I bumped into them on Madison Avenue, and I was dressed in a suit, and they were dressed, normally, and they said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I work right here at the Davidoff store, selling cigars." And they said, "Oh, no music, huh?" And I said, "Well, I'm still playing, but this is it's a great gig. I was selling cigars in college, and it just worked out perfect." I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm headed up to Sony. I work at Sony," which was just 2 blocks up. And I thought to myself, "Oh man, this guy's already doing it. He's been out of college as long as I have, and he's working at Sony." And he was carrying coffees. And I said, "Oh, what do you do at Sony?" And he said, "Oh, I'm an assistant for so-and-so that works in this office that's under this person." And I'm thinking I had this like light bulb moment. I'm like, which one of us has really departed what it was that we set out to do? You're running around picking up coffees for an administrator at Sony. You're not working in the music business. You're an errand boy. And so granted, I'm not getting a paycheck from the music business either, but I'm wearing a suit and tie and I'm becoming an expert in my field. So I'm developing, right? To me, there's a greater path to what I originally set out to do as a musician, which was get better at something I love, turn my passion into a profession. And even though music at the core was my first love, day in and day out, my love and passion for premium cigar industry was growing every moment. And so in hindsight, I realized that that balance and opting into every opportunity in every way was exactly the same thing as pursuing a career in music, because the why was exactly the same. They were my favorite things to do, and they were turning passion into profession and making a living doing something that in my head I would normally have to pay to do. Um, and so I really I balanced those two entities, music and cigars, really from 2002 through 2006. And in 2006, Davidoff bought a store on the west side and offered me the position of general manager. And so that was probably the first real major move of chips into the cigar table, and I loved it. And I really I learned so much in those couple of years. And then in 2008, the gentleman that hired me at Madison Avenue, who was still there, left for another position, and Davidoff offered me a new position to run both stores in New York City. So that was 2008. I was 28 years old, and to me, that again was just one of those opportunities. Like this is it. This is the right move. And so I took more chips and moved them into the middle of the cigar table, but was still playing and still performing and still recording. And then in 2011, when I was approached by the Sherman family to join, that I knew was certainly going to be a much more all-in move. But at that point, I was 31, and it was the right thing. I had just been married. We knew we eventually wanted to start a family, and it just made a lot of sense. And then by that time, now I was in New York for 10 years or so. I had watched my peers who had come to New York to continue their careers in music also find alternative paths. And I realized, just because I set out to be a professional musician does not limit myself to what I ultimately can be. And so now in hindsight, my path was certainly not straight. My path was absolutely, a left and a right and another right and around the corner and over a bridge and through a tunnel. But nevertheless, I couldn't be happier of the path that I've been on. I couldn't be happier for the relationships I have, and more grateful for the people in my life and the things that pursuing my passions have brought me.
Where does New York City fit into all of that? Because you mentioned time and place, and I can fully relate to that left, right, and a very, unusual pathway, if you will. Is New York City a place that truly accelerates such a CV and such an evolution?
New York City, I come from a very small town. There are buildings in Manhattan with more people than the town that I grew up in. It is a city that, if when you visit the first time, it's for you or it's not. I think your first exposure to New York City will define your relationship with it in perpetuity. I can remember going and saying, "This is where I'm going to be," when I was 8. I know other kids that grew up in my town who went to New York City and vowed never to return. They were so scared. But for me, there was just the energy, the smells, the sounds, being a jazz guy, everything about it was everything I wanted. And so it felt right from the moment I got there. But the thing about New York that's so funny is there is a certain degree of sacrifice and struggle in order to last there. Um, even at the very top echelons, I have a buddy of mine who runs security for a billionaire who lives in a mansion on Fifth Avenue, one of the few remaining single family mansions in New York City. And he joked to me that they have no parking. I mean, there are these really sort of fundamental things that you learn to do without. And that struggle is something that is built into the DNA of anyone who lives in New York. For me, that was everything until it started not to be. So, once my kids were born, I couldn't live the New York life the way, I did before kids were born. When my wife and I were first married, it was great. You go out to dinners and you're out late and you jump in a cab and you go home and you wake up 4 hours later with a rock on your head and it doesn't make a difference and you go to work. As life changes, priorities change, and as priorities change, perspective changes. And certainly having children changed my relationship to New York City. But it's interesting that you ask that question because 3 years ago we moved to New Jersey, and I remember being profoundly emotional on the day that I was getting in my car, leaving Astoria, Queens, and driving to my home in New Jersey. And I couldn't figure out why on earth this felt so emotional to me. And I realized that I grew up in Northeast Connecticut. I moved there when I was 3 with my family and my twin sister, and I left when I was 18. So I think about when people ask, where do I grow up? Where did I grow up? I grew up in Northeast Connecticut. But in actuality, I moved to New York City at 22, and I moved to New Jersey at 37. And 22 to 37 is way more growing up than 3 to 18. And so New York really is where I became the me that you're talking to right now. That's the me that was developed from 22 to 37 in New York. But fortunately, I still had roots in New York because we had the Townhouse. And so it is only just this past November that I not only kind of turned in my keys to the Townhouse, but I also really ended the New York City connection that I had had for now 20 years. And it was incredibly emotional, but I also, as I remember driving home that day thinking, I'm good with this, this is the right next step. It's the right next chapter in this story. And the good news is New York City is 30 minutes away and it's over the bridge and I can drive there anytime. And I realize I don't have to have keys to a door there anymore. I don't have to pay $40 for parking 3 days a week. I don't have to pay, in fact, some of those things that I held on to as valuable, it turns out they're not as valuable as perhaps I made them. And so New York City for me is certainly time and place, but I am so enthusiastic about this next time and place in my life with Ferio Tego.
As a matter of fact, in particular, those struggles that you mentioned and the challenges that a city like New York keeps throwing at you, that's got a lot of it has a lot of impact on you, and it truly shapes you both personally and professionally. I still remember when I left London after living and working there. It was such a challenging time, man, but I had tears in my eyes when I left because it built such a strong connection. And I can only imagine what it must be like in New York City. But as a consequence of that, and what I'm truly curious is, New York City also has a particular cigar lifestyle, I believe, and you not only experienced that, but you also had a tremendous impact on it over the past years of your career, first with Davidoff and then with Nat Sherman, as the quintessential epicenter of the New York City cigar lifestyle. What does that lifestyle, A, look like, and B, mean to you?
I realize that we often can place more self-assessed value on things that we believe define us. I think to a large extent, for many years, I thought Davidoff defined me until I left and I went to do something else and realized that, in fact, Davidoff did not define me. It certainly contributed to who I am, but it does not define me. And move on to Nat Sherman. To a large extent, for those people who did not know me, when I left Davidoff to go to Nat Sherman, people said, I can't imagine Davidoff without you, and I can't imagine you anywhere else. Then the next almost decade, I think a lot of folks did the same thing to Nat Sherman, where Nat Sherman, to a large extent, defined me. I started identifying myself with Nat Sherman until the moment I don't, right? And now here we are again. New York can really do that. And the New York cigar scene for many years was day in, day out part of my life. But sometimes you try and hold on to something to try and save it when it is unsavable. And that's not to say that the New York City cigar scene is unsavable, but I must say the limitations and restrictions that our local government and state government have applied to the retail and nightlife of premium cigars have killed the lifestyle. You add to that the pandemic with the closing of businesses. Any cigar bar is dining, so that has been closed, absolutely closed. And in the middle of it, if it couldn't get any worse, the governor increased, or I should say, adjusted the way tobacco tax is paid, that now effectively places the price of premium cigars in the state of New York roughly 40% higher than any neighboring state or internet. How is a lifestyle supposed to survive when whether deliberate or not is just being slaughtered? So I look back at the premium cigar lifestyle of 2002 when I moved to New York, which, if you can believe it, you could smoke in a steakhouse, you could smoke in a bar. It was not that long ago, and the slow destruction of it is quite sad. That said, the places that are left, I believe, will really thrive. The retail that is left in New York City has tremendous back-end support. It's basically Davidoff and Casa de Monte Cristo, so owned by Davidoff and owned by Altadis. Those folks can withstand the pressure. And for the sort of lifestyle component, you have Club Macanudo, which is owned by General, which is owned by STG. Hopefully they can withstand some of that destruction. And then there are a handful of other venues that remain eligible to reopen. Hopefully they will. And I think those places, now with fewer options, I think those places that have been able to hold out are really ripe to resurrect whatever the new cigar lifestyle will be in New York City.
your career has always been sort of playing in the most positive way with that very fine balance between large corporates and still that rather personal, intimate, sort of one-on-one experience, and the way you described your entrepreneurial thinking almost as if it were your own business, which you now have. Usually those large companies have sort of a strong path forward and a very clear and distinct company profile. Do you think that you somehow had to sort of fit in and adjust somehow, or do you see the value and the benefit of these large corporations with their backing and what you just described as being strong entities?
I think it probably depends on the entity. What I do find, I can speak about the companies I've worked for. I've worked for Davidoff, which is a huge but still family business. I've worked for the Sherman family, which was I'd say, medium-sized family business. And I've worked for Altria, which is a ginormous American publicly traded company. Despite the different cultures that exist across the three, what they share is a genuine appreciation for just how special this is. In fact, when I think of the most recent Altria, they exited the premium cigar industry because it wasn't core to what they do, and frankly, it was the amount of work and effort that goes into this is probably 5 times that to go into something like the world's leading cigarette, or even Nat Sherman cigarettes for that matter, with a return infinitely tinier than those larger aspects. And so even on the Altria side, what I admire about them so much is their recognition and appreciation for how special it is, their desire and commitment to try and find a new home for our company, which they certainly didn't have to do. And then ultimately, though we weren't successful transacting, keeping all of us employed through the pandemic, letting everyone have soft landings at the conclusion. And then when we did actually engage and say, do you think it might be possible for Brendon and I to acquire these brands? It's a very foreign concept to the way they typically do business. It was an overwhelming yes. Let's figure this out. I think a lot of outside in voyeuristic opinions, I think, have had the wrong impression about Altria. But I think their actions really speak volumes to even their appreciation, recognizing that it doesn't fit within their ecosystem. They still really had profound affection and respect and admiration for it, so much so that they've allowed it to continue. But I've certainly learned different things from each place, and my entrepreneurialism also was balanced by realism, that an entrepreneurial spirit is not the same as a principle. And I think often entrepreneurial spirits can sometimes get in front of the reality that one is an employee. And so what I always did was bring my entrepreneurial spirit and commitment and conviction to every job I've ever had, with the complete understanding that they can say no. In which case, no problem. I'll get back in line and do what I'm supposed to do. It does require that balance. What I'm so excited for now is that now it is the entrepreneurial spirit that can drive the decisions. And the only person who's going to say no is Brendon. And if he says no, I'm going to kill him. No. Now we can really take that. And let's face it, man, a lot of that entrepreneurial spirit, when you're not a principal, there's a reason why they say no, because they probably weren't well thought out, crafted ideas rooted in any kind of economic model whatsoever. What I'm so grateful for is the fact that I learned so much through that process. I understood the reconciling of the idea versus the economics of it. And so now I feel like I really am in a great position to be able to apply what I've learned, to incorporate several companies' processes and ways of thinking, and now really carving one out that is uniquely Ferio Tego for the future.
As weird as it might sound, and I mean this very respectful, do you believe that sometimes with all the brother and sister of the leaf and the talk about the passion in the cigar industry, we over amplify and we overemphasize the romantic side of the business and the industry a little too much?
No. What I think we do, though, is we interpret passion and enthusiasm for expertise. And I think that probably gets in the way more than the romanticism. Where I struggle are when people who are devotedly passionate and in love take their passion and enthusiasm for a hobby and I guess learn too quickly. Meaning, if they hear one thing, they take it as fact, they repeat it now as an expert, and that happens. That's not unique to cigars. That's in every industry. When it's so easy to deliver information and for other people to receive it, assuming it's correct, it's not deliberate by any means. No one's trying to spread misinformation. But for me, if there is a risk, it is not over amplifying the passion or the romanticism. In fact, I think that can continue to be amplified. But there needs to be clear delineation of hobbyists and passionistas and brothers and sisters of the leaf versus professionals of the leaf and experts of the leaf. And what I would also say, Reinhardt, is you've met enough experts to know no expert would self-identify as one. There's too much to learn. And every expert that I've spent the last 20 years learning from and working with will all say, there is still more to learn than I know. And so I think for me, that's often a telltale sign when I see, particularly in social media, people delivering facts and facts and facts. And did you know, in my head, that is in fact someone who should probably learn more before they identify as an expert. But no, I would say we amplify the passion, we amplify the romance, because at the end of the day, how do we differentiate this product? How do we keep this as the jazz within the larger music world? This is not a habit. This is not an addiction. This is not something that we must have. It's something we'd like to have. Now, I'd like to have it as much as possible, but if there is a moment when I cannot, I'm not falling apart. I'm just longing for the moment when I can. And that's as much about doing it in a community like this, with people like this. This is the opposite of a cigarette outside your office door with a coffee. It is the opposite. That's why jazz still lives in clubs. It's the opposite of arena. And there's nothing wrong with any of them. I have nothing against anyone that wants to go outside and smoke a cigarette and have a coffee. Nothing wrong with it at all. But we just need to identify it's different. And the romance and the passion and the enthusiasm, nobody loves a cigarette break in the winter outside their office. But everyone on this call loves an hour with friends and a premium cigar. And so that level of love and romance and passion and enthusiasm needs to be amplified every single time we cut a cigar and light it.
There's a lot of tension in all those various little details and the intricacies of the industry. Did you sometimes feel torn apart between what was going on, probably your passion for the premium cigars, and then big tobacco on the other side? Um, I believe in particular when the whole controversy erupted following that Cigar Aficionado article back in the days regarding Altria's position on FDA regulation, which was certainly misinterpreted by many people or just like short-sighted. But also with everything that you love about the industry and then what you've experienced in corporate world, how did you deal with those tensions and different ideas and concepts pulling apart?
Well, you brought up the probably biggest example, which was the backlash to the Cigar Aficionado story about Altria's comments, where one would have assumed the conflict would have been between the premium cigar priorities and big tobacco's priorities. The reality is that is not where the conflict existed at all. The 9-page comments speak for themselves. In fact, Altria and Big Tobacco, on behalf of our premium cigar business, did a complete departure from their historical position solely to embrace and support the premium cigar industry, with one difference. The difference being that Altria said that they were not in favor of exemption. But to be clear, they were not opposed. They just were not lobbying for it. The way that was reported by Cigar Aficionado was editorialized, and then the way it was engaged was a moment I will never forget. But it was in those moments where I felt the separateness, when people jumped to conclusions rather than giving me the benefit of the doubt, that what they were reading was in fact not the entirety of the story. And for the years to follow, though thankfully we were able to regain confidence as people actually bothered to investigate and read further. But there remained folks who were uninterested in discovering more, and I think found it easier to simply assume guilt. I have spent the entirety of my career advocating for premium cigars in every moment of every waking hour, as an ambassador, not for the company I work for alone, but for the industry in which it lives and grows. And to see my peers in those moments immediately turn was heartbreaking. However, it also was the catalyst that made me want to work harder and reach out to more people and correct the record and demonstrate that, in fact, what we did was uh, our dream come true. We did the very thing we dreamed of as an industry. We got Big Tobacco to say the same words as us, with the exception of one. They didn't share the same feelings of exemption, but they delivered the message that, if you fast forward to today, is the very message that has resonated so strongly that it's why we are in the stage we're in, that premium cigars are in fact different, that the definition is crystal clear with absolutely no opportunities for loopholes. Um, there is 100% tobacco with no homogenized. That was problematic for some of our peers in the premium cigar industry who were advocating for homogenized in certain examples to be included in the definition of premium. It was part of our position that such a an inclusion would in fact allow companies like ours to find loopholes to be able to get more products into that bucket. And so by delivering the message we delivered, we prohibited our biggest sellers from being included in that very, our meaning Altria, of course, being included in that bucket. And it was done intentionally to preserve and protect premium. Um, so the struggle, to your point, Reinhardt, I'm answering way too long in all these questions, but um, the struggle in that divisiveness for me was in fact non-existent in the very place where most people would probably think it would have been, which was attached and associated with big tobacco. And in fact, it was some of those temporary moments where emotions ran high, knee-jerk reactions occurred. And again, I don't blame anybody for having a visceral knee-jerk reaction to that article. The assumption is that what Cigar Aficionado writes is fact, and any principal or passionate enthusiast who would read those words, assume they're fact, should be absolutely angry beyond words. The unfortunate part was the article was not factual. It was an editorial. And so that just made more work for us to do. But I honestly look back at those days, Reinhard, as crazy and emotional as they were, as some of the greatest days of my career, because it forced us to rally as a team, to act unemotional and with conviction and come up with a real plan and execute on the plan and communicate with our partners, communicate with consumers, correct the record, and then move forward stronger. And I'll tell you what, man, we did. And honestly, that was 2018. It was a record year for us, only to be beaten by 2019.
Brilliant to hear. In retrospect, would you also say that it was a chance that was missed, probably back in those days, with the way Altria tried to comment on the FDA's request, or would it have gone south anyways?
I don't think there is nothing that, obviously, with the exception of stating that a favorable position towards exemption, which I would have preferred, the comments were a dream come true. And we delivered on everything that the premium cigar industry could have ever dreamed us to deliver on. The fact that the company was not in favor of regulation but did not stand opposed doesn't bother me. And in fact, we went on at the same time to co-author a bill called the Cole-Bishop Bill, which within it exempted premium cigars, and we helped author it. That was actually covered in other articles at the same time that Cigar Aficionado, they refused to correct the record or include it for the record. But again, there was no opposition to exemption should it occur, or there was no effort to prevent exemption. What was important was simply that Altria's position was very simple and clear. If tobacco is regulated, all tobacco is regulated. If cigars are regulated, all cigars are regulated. But went on to say to be regulated differently, and then explain exactly how and exactly why. And again, if you look at where we are today, the language practically mirrors the words that we submitted then. If there was an opportunity, I wish there had been more openness to truly understand the argument that Altria was trying to make, and more importantly, why, as opposed to really the infighting that occurred. But nevertheless, I cannot blame principals who own their business and want to protect their interests. That is the name of the game. And so I admire and appreciate everyone's passion and everyone's hard work and everyone's defense of their businesses, of their employees, of their families. Everyone was just trying to do what was best for them. And hopefully, although it's not perfect for everyone, I look at where we are today, and it sure seems to me that minus some of the fringe, we are largely together in moving forward.
We have a question from Mario, who is here with us at the
Hey, Mario.
lounge. Feel free to just unmute the mic and.
Yes, good evening, everyone.
Hi, Mario. Good to
Mario.
see you.
Hi, Mike. First of all, thanks for the engagement during the first lockdown. I'm a big follower, and all those lives were just very entertaining, and was a pleasure to spend time with you behind the screen.
Thank you.
My question is, looks like you started a career in the industry without wanted. So was it more challenging when you are 22 years old, not knowing what the cigar industry is actually, or nowadays that you have faced your own success and know how challenging it can be?
Thank you, Mario. Good question. It also goes back to time and place. I was 22 years old, living in a basement in Astoria I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I had nothing but time and a young liver. I mean, the world, New York City was my oyster at that time. When I look at it today, though, sometimes there's fear in knowledge. Almost, you know too much. I know what makes the sausage. You know what I mean? I know what the wizard behind the curtain is. But I think for me, with that knowledge comes incredible empowerment. I feel very, very prepared and conditioned. And again, my career path was so unique because I was able to maintain an active role in multiple levels of industry, meaning I had daily time in the Townhouse. My finger was on the pulse of retail and the evolution of retail and the consumer experience. At the same time, I was spending most of my time in product development, working with the factories, traveling to Dominican, Nicaragua, Honduras, visiting the fields, learning more about tobacco, learning about blending. And while doing both of those, building a wholesale team, engaging with retailers, coming up with marketing plans, learning what strategies work in certain markets and what doesn't. So I feel that the breadth of my experience, certainly over the last 9 years, and you can add my time at Davidoff before that, has been so diverse and so sort of cross-functional that if I had, let's say, left Davidoff in 2011 to start my own brand, I would have had to learn all of those things as I was building a company for myself. Again, a great advantage here of applying an entrepreneurial spirit to a company I don't own is the ability to really learn without risking it all. Now, let's face it, I'm risking it all, but I'm doing so with a much deeper understanding of sort of the very three silos in which our industry's ecosystem lives. And so having spent so much time intertwined and active in each of those silos, my fear level is very, very low.
Thanks for the answer.
Thank you for the question.
Mario, it's always a pleasure to see you, and thank you for raising that question. A quick in-between question before we move on to Roxa, but there was a question: what happened to the Partagas chest that was stored at Nat Sherman?
So all of the, so an interesting fact, Nat Sherman was the exclusive importer and distributor for the Cuban Bolivar brand in the United States. Back in the 40s and the 50s, pre-embargo, of course, and was also a distributor of Cuban cigars, I think one of 5 that were east of the Mississippi River. So the Shermans did have quite a unique collection of pre-embargo Cuban cigars from Partagas and Bolivar. When the Shermans sold the business in 2017, those items were carved out and retained by the family. So they have that original Partagas chest, which there's an incredible video of AJ Patel, which you can find on YouTube, of AJ opening the chest and really kind of telling stories about it. So that's worth watching, but they're in safe hands in the Sherman family collection.
So Roxa, your time, please speak up.
Thank you, guys.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, Roxa.
So my name is Roxana, actually. Just in
Roxana.
Romania, it's shorter, Roxa, like something cuter, kind of.
I like it.
I like it also. This is why I use it. So my question was this. I am in some of American groups, and I observe that a lot of American people smoke kind of cheap cigars, not the bad ones, but very cheap ones. They don't smoke, I don't know, Davidoff. They don't smoke Oliva. They smoke very cheap cigars. Is there something about the difference, about social difference? Do you feel that?
Well, I think this is my opinion. Cheap can have different connotations and definitions. There is cheap in the integrity of way something is manufactured, and there is cheap in the final cost to a consumer. What I would say is there is a in American consumerism, there is always a desire to find value. And that doesn't mean that they don't celebrate with more expensive products or maybe higher quality, but it doesn't take away from the integrity of the product versus the cost of the product. But I would also say specifically, you have different cultures even within each sort of social group. What I would tell you is the majority of the premium cigar consumers purchasing Davidoff are not on Facebook. And if they are, they're not on Facebook with their hobby. So what I think you find in some of the upper echelon products, that the most loyal consumers of those products are not connecting with that particular hobby publicly in social media and those types of things. And the folks who are engaging more often in some of those groups are probably more in line with each other in really identifying some of that more value. There's a lot more regularity also, I think, to the consumption patterns of a lot of the people posting. And so if you are enjoying a cigar every day, or sometimes 2 cigars a day, then you also have to factor in the economics. And so as a result, you would then have to find cigars that you could afford to enjoy 1 or 2 a day, which I think for most hobbyists in America is probably not a Davidoff. And so I think what you're seeing is just the result of a few different factors that are happening to align in this one very, very small minority, but a vocal minority of premium cigar enthusiasts who are also engaging regularly on social media platforms. Because I'll tell you, my biggest customers at Davidoff, my biggest customers at Nat Sherman, we're not friends on Facebook. Does that answer your question?
May I continue with 2 small questions, please?
Of course.
I have no
Fire
objection.
away.
Sorry, Reinhard.
Not at all.
Just
Fire
a minute.
away. It's all good.
Okay, so your clients, very premium ones, why they don't show off a little bit? It's not about showing off, it's about the passion. As you said earlier, it's not a thing that you are addicted of. It's just the passion and the pleasure. And the second one is that I observed that in many of the meetings of Reinhard, and not only, and thank you also, Reinhard, the interesting things are in the last 30 minutes or so. Why?
So it sounds like the second question was for Reinhard, not for me.
No, because you are starting to explain some interesting things, but just now, it's not a problem. It was a real pleasure. Understand me well, but it's just an opinion.
Roxa, are you saying I was boring for the first hour of this conversation?
No.
Is that what you're
No.
Well, listen, so to answer the second part, I can tell you, having been a part of a number of these types of conversations, you always have to start establishing the wheel starting to turn before it starts really spinning freely. That's the case with any conversation. So thank you for surviving the first half to get to the second half, because the second half is always better than the first half. Same with a cigar, right? Let's face it. We smoke through the first couple of inches to really get to the good stuff. As it relates to the sort of sharing and posting about products, I really think, again, you're looking at a very filtered subset of cigar smokers, and you know, I have even seen, you know, people want to brag about things that they believe will be embraced and applauded. Nobody wants to brag about something and then be ridiculed for it. What I've seen in quite a lot of these Facebook posts are when people post a very expensive product, it's not met with, oh my gosh, that's the greatest cigar in the world. It's met with, you should try one of these, it's half the price. Or, you know, there's often ridicule associated with sometimes bragging about the best of. Now, what I will tell you is there are some groups, for example, I'm part of a Davidoff cigar only group on Facebook. And so that's a great place, because you want to see a pissing contest, that's a pissing contest. Everybody is bragging about Royal this and Oro that, and mine's 200, mine's 500, mine's 800, you know, so that exists. But again, I think specifically to the groups that you're referring to, it sounds to me, just based on the groups that I observe, is that they tend to kind of create their own culture, they create their own parameters, and then everyone, in the spirit of wanting to be embraced and included and applauded, kind of everyone falls into line. And so it ultimately becomes, sounds like the ones that you're seeing are really sort of the value cigar groups.
Besides being one of the most respected figures in the industry, you have also built a tremendous presence on social media. And again, that is a very fine balance. And in particular, in an industry that is so heavily dependent on the mystique and the tradition and the heritage and that analog earth and soil experience. Um, COVID, I mean, has been the accelerator really for digitalization and some looming threats that we always knew about, but never really took seriously. Um, where do you see the state of the industry at the edge of analog and digital?
Well, it is constantly evolving. I think clearly COVID has forced every industry to evolve in a way that can straddle the virtual from the reality. Um, what I what I love about premium cigars, why I know brick and mortar will always exist, is that this cannot be enjoyed virtually. You physically must light it and you physically must puff it. And there is no alternative to that behavior. There's no evolution of that behavior. It is just the only way it can be enjoyed. Um, and so I love that simplicity and how true it is. But that said, for years, we have evolved into a culture where events were critical for growth, that people had to get out in front of people and shake hands because that's what was driving growth in shops. And I think that has really slid backwards in a very important and meaningful way, because I will tell you my experience over the last 4 years. I was on an airplane every week. And I was usually only gone a night or two. My colleagues were gone from Monday through Thursday every week. Um, and while that's great for business, it's not great for family. It's not great for kids. It's not great for relationships. And yet you find yourself, principal or not, driven to compete with the pace at which the industry is evolving. And you do so at the sacrifice of what is probably most important, which is your family and your relationships at home. I think this has really provided for a great reset to force people to think how they can reach without leaving. And things like this, things like social media, finding ways to present information to still give the value of what can be perceived as direct interaction, direct sharing of knowledge. I feel truly like I'm enjoying a cigar with all of you, despite the fact that we're not face to face. And then I ask myself, well, gosh, if we were face to face, I would only enjoy a cigar with some of you. And so I think this evolution has really been extraordinarily valuable for the future growth of our industry, and certainly I'd say has been embraced by the majority of our industry. And if it doesn't work for everybody, no problem, or if they're not comfortable with it, no problem. But for me, this has been really a game changer, and I'm all in. I think it's tremendous, but it can't replace. And I think that's what's important, is at some point we will get back to traveling. We will, I still have to go to the factories. That can't be done virtually. So there will start to be that ease back into face-to-face and travel. But I also think that the value of those moments are worth infinitely more the next time we do it than the last time we did it. And I think being able to really prioritize, make the time that you spend face to face with people meaningful, efficient, and then to be able to return and now work in these new conditions with new technology. I think that new normal is going to be tremendously valuable, probably across all industries, but I would certainly imagine for ours.
Since you mentioned the factories going down there, let's talk a little bit more in depth about Ferio Tego. And we had a great question from Mark a bit earlier over on Facebook. And he asked, had you not acquired the legacy brands from Nat Sherman International, would you have still launched Ferio Tego regardless?
Yes. So the plan was to create Ferio Tego, to do it myself, and to develop it as a premium cigar brand. That was the plan. To some degree, maybe that should have stuck with that plan, because this new plan has become a much different proposition than the idea of starting something from scratch and kind of growing as we grow. So the plan was certainly to do Ferio Tego and to bring it to market as a new brand and a new company. But the opportunity to not only do that, but then under that umbrella and legacy of Ferio Tego, to now restore the legacy of these brands that my partner and I have spent our last decade building in the first place, is quite an honor and really quite an opportunity. So it was one that we just couldn't pass up once we realized that it was possible. But the answer is yes, Ferio Tego would have happened regardless.
I can only imagine that you're already having a hard time keeping up with the demand stateside, but obviously, since we have a lot of people tuning in from Europe, we've seen many questions whether or not Ferio Tego will at some point hit other shores and probably come over to Europe.
I would say it is the priority two. So we have never successfully grown internationally with those brands. It was not a priority for the Sherman family when they had it, and it was a priority for us as we grew it post 2011. In fact, in the fall of 2016, I traveled to Dortmund to engage international distributors and start finding pathway to more international presence. That was the fall of 2016. In January of 2017, the Shermans sold the business to Altria. Altria is only an American operator. And so that really precluded us from international growth, because Altria does not do business outside of the United States of America. And so we were sort of just left in a holding pattern. We were growing regularly in the United States, but the only access overseas was either if someone traveled to the United States and purchased it, or for the few retailers that have been able to ship across shores. What I would say is, since the United States is our most mature market, it's priority one that we restore the brand here and get it back into the stores where it has successfully been sold for many years. Once we've restored those volumes, priority two will be then to engage in probably the easiest barrier of entry markets where, quote, New World cigars are viable, and then begin to grow internationally. So I've got it listed as a probably second half of 2022 effort.
Well, I can reassure you there's plenty of people waiting, at least given the comments here and all the messages that we got before the show. So people are certainly excited.
That's great to hear.
Let's bring in one of our most loyal fellows and friends, Ian. You had a question from Michael.
Michael, thank you for a very interesting talk. I wasn't bored at all. And I'm from England, where we're very used to high cigar prices. And also, until fairly recently, I think a lot of English people just stuck with Cuban cigars, but that is changing dramatically. You probably are aware of that. And
Yes, sir.
places now are trying New World cigars. Though still, of some of my cigar friends, you know, I mentioned Drew Estate or Plasencia, and they look at me blankly, and I just think, well, how are you missing out on this? So I've been really impressed by your passion and your enthusiasm, and obviously your knowledge of it. So I wish you very well, and I hope you can come over to England, and that perhaps we can try your cigars over here. And I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Ian. I really appreciate it. I've been really pleased to see, and again, mostly on social media, but to see the embrace of non-Cuban, non-Davidoff cigars, certainly in the UK and throughout EU broadly. But what continues to blow my mind, and I actually commented, there was a London retailer who I'll leave out, but who was having an online dialogue with a colleague, and who commented about his favorite Havana cigar that he loved so much. And he said, you know, when they're good, they're really good. And I commented back, if only non-Cuban cigars were given the same level of forgiveness that the rest of the world gives Cuban cigars, because we don't enjoy that benefit at all. I recently did a look back at Monte Cristo #2, specifically in Cigar Aficionado, and I looked at every rating they awarded Cigar Aficionado. They awarded Monte Cristo #2, and more specifically the tasting notes, because I thought it was probably a cigar that gets rated at least annually. And so I tracked the date it was smoked, the box date that it came from, which they generally report, the score, and the tasting notes. And you would have thought these were 12 different cigars that they enjoyed over the course of that period. Again, a benefit that non-Cuban cigars don't enjoy, but frankly, it's also one that shouldn't be tolerated. And yet it has become tolerable from non-Cubans. And so, Ian, what I hope we can do as New World cigars continue to be introduced and more widely available, I hope, in fact, we may be able to put pressure on Cuba to step up their game, to live by the standard of New World cigars, where for so long we have tried to live up to the standard of Cuban cigars. Because if you look at the New World non-Cuban cigars of today, they are of the highest quality. They are the most consistent year over year, which is what we have come to depend on with non-Cuban cigars, that every time you enjoy a Nat Sherman Timeless #2, it is not only the same as the last one you had, but it is in fact the same as the first one you had. And really, that is one of those things that I think makes New World cigars really stand out above many, many Cuban cigars. And so hopefully that will continue to permeate into the thoughts and minds of typical Cuban cigar lovers, and they'll begin to explore other flavors and other tastes and other experiences.
I think that will happen. I mean, I have a cigar friend who will only smoke Monte Cristo #2s, and he could afford any cigar in the world, but he sticks with those. But I agree with you. I mean, the quality of Cuban cigars is so variable. You can buy a box of 10 and 2 or 3 will be very disappointing. I've very rarely had a New World cigar that has not been a good smoke. And I think people are beginning to realize now that, certainly in England, Cubans are overpriced. When you're paying £100, $130 for a Cohiba Bahiki, you know, it's not that great a smoke for the money. It certainly isn't. It's a good cigar, but it's not, you know, it's not worth 10 times something like a Sobremesa, which is one of my favorites. So I think there's an opening there for you, and I wish you well.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, since we were talking about international markets, and expansion. Edson had a very interesting question, and I would really like for Edson to raise that question himself. So please go ahead, brother.
Hi, Michael.
Hello. There you are. I see you.
Good. Sorry for my garbs. It's 30 degrees where I am.
Good for
Celsius.
you, bro.
Yeah, I'm enjoying some nice heat while listening to this.
I am enjoying the exact opposite that you are. Let me tell you.
I can see from all the jackets and furs I see around.
Forget it.
So listen, Michael, I actually been poking Reinhard with these questions for the last couple of weeks, and I'm really looking at, from what I see around the world, I see that Africa is my prediction. Africa is gonna be one of the new emerging markets. I see Asia is growing up now, but I think Africa is really growing. In Mozambique, we are a Portuguese-speaking country, so we have a big connection to Cuba. So Cuba was a big source of cigars, but with time, the availability and ways of people getting cigars now have become really US and Europe. So in my book, New World cigars are what I've been smoking 90% of the time lately, simply because of availability. So we've grown a deep love for it now. So as have you guys at Ferio have an idea, or do you have a pulse of what can be done in this new market for Africa? Are you looking at?
You know,
at
it's
this side of
I have a customer. I had a customer at Nat Sherman in the store who may very well be watching this, and he and a partner are opening a cigar store in Africa. And I cannot remember in what region or town they're opening, but they were commenting to me the very same thing, that there is an extraordinary momentum in appreciation for premium cigars in Africa. My prevailing guidance is that we will go where there is appreciation for what we do. You know, particularly as a startup, Edson, I mean, you know, we don't have boots on the ground in every state or every country or every market. And so we will rely heavily on the genuine enthusiasm and willingness to help bring us to a new market. And so I've truth be told, I've not spent a lot of time researching specifically the African market from a retail or a consumer standpoint, but you are not the first person to say just how exciting it is, which makes me think that when I hang up on this call, I've got a little homework to do, my man.
Sure. I really think it's something to be looked at. Just as an example, 4 years ago, we had, and I'm in the capital city of a 28, 30 million inhabitants country. 4 years ago, we had about 2 guys that sold cigars really on the boot of their car, wherever they got from Europe, from trade travels. And now we have 4 cigar lounges in one city, you know, brand new, and with guys bringing cigars from wherever, and we're having competition about price. So I think it's something that the growth will be slow, definitely, because of buying power. But I think it's something that if you could get your hands on it early, it would be something that will bring you great advantage. So
maybe you could send me a message after this on Instagram or something. We'll exchange emails and we'll remain in touch.
100%, buddy.
I'd love it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike.
Edson, many thanks for the wonderful question and the comment. And I'm just truly grateful that we have a really global audience and people logging in and following our conversations from all over. So it means a lot to me. And I also believe that it opens up a lot of opportunity in terms of inspiration, where different aromatic qualities and inspirations come from, spices, different palettes. And I know for a fact that you have a lot of inspiration coming from other industries and other fields of expertise. Like you hang out a lot with top chefs and sommeliers and the wine industry, as well as with gentlemen's clothing and the more lifestyle-esque connotation. What I'm very interested in is how does that factor into your perception on a multisensory level, and also in the way you then turn it into the experiences that you want to deliver through your cigars?
I have absolutely no idea. No. I actually think it can all be traced back to music. Music is one of those things that you can't touch it, right? It's not tangible. Music is something that can only be felt. Of course, you hear it, but you don't just hear it. You feel it. You internalize it in a way that allows you to decide whether you like it or whether you don't. You hear music, but what makes you do this to music is not what you hear, it's what you feel. What draws a tear is not what you hear, it's what you feel in music. I think that connection to feeling is what has driven not only my passion and enthusiasm for premium cigars, but why also then those other passions or hobbies, as you pointed out, whether it's wine, spirits, culinary, menswear, they're much more about feel to me. And so when I think about how to develop a new blend, for example, well, of course it has to taste good, it has to burn correctly, it has to do all the things that standard cigars do, and perhaps that's the measure at which most cigars are critiqued. But as an artist, there is something much greater, because it is about how it makes me feel as an artist to create it and present it, and much to often the disappointment of artists, it can be how it makes you feel. You know, nobody creates a painting for someone not to like. No one creates a cigar that we hope you won't enjoy. It is done with the truest intention, where everyone is great. And as an artist, then to be met with the criticism of this is a little off, or this is just, not something I like, it can be devastating to an artist, which is then what drives you to do it again, to look differently, to find something else. When I look at the inspiration I draw from those sort of adjacent categories, anybody can make spaghetti and meatballs, but what makes Scott Conant's spaghetti and meatballs so good? It's of course the ingredients, but what else? Well, it's in fact the way it's served. Well, how does he do it? Well, in fact, it's a bowl in a plate, and it's twirled with chopsticks, and it's placed in a cup that's then turned upside down, and all of those things together, well, it's still freaking spaghetti. You know what I mean? But everything about it is different. That is where I draw inspiration from these folks, is that they're not just thinking about the ingredients, but it's the total composition, it's the background, it's the perspective, it's the presentation, it's the way you feel when you eat it. Those types of evocative nuances are probably something that maybe I spend too much time thinking about. But for example, making a cigar, the blend development and critique and fine tuning is done blind without bands, but then the final tuning is done with the band, because it has to taste the way it feels. The way the band looks may make me think about the way I want it to come across differently than I did when I was simply exploring it as a blind blend exploration. And so all of those things kind of come into play, not unlike wine, the shape of a glass, the shape of a bottle, the shape of a decanter, not unlike menswear, you know, lapel width, collar width, all these different things that many folks may not even recognize it. And so that becomes the torture that comes with going down the rabbit hole of learning more and learning more and learning more, that with some of that expertise comes an even higher bar that you set for yourself for expertise, to do the next thing, for perfection, not for expertise.
I mean, that element of experiential design, it truly speaks to my heart. And also as a reference back to hospitality, when you said probably a lot of people won't even recognize it, but it's like the feeling when you enter a certain restaurant or bar and it just feels right. Everything's spot on and you can't put your finger on it, but you know it's perfectly composed and it fits.
When I joined Nat Sherman, the first hire I made was for someone to run the Townhouse. And the guy I hired was a 55-year-old general manager of a steakhouse that was down the block from Davidoff. Now, everyone in the industry knew him because he was always at my place smoking cigars, and every time we did dinners, we did those together. But when he went to Nat Sherman, everyone said, "What in the hell does Pat know about selling cigars?" And I said, "Absolutely nothing. But he knows everything about hot food hot, cold food cold. How do you make somebody feel good from the moment they walk in the door? The front of the house is in fact more important than the back of the house. But the back of the house is what delivers and supports front of house." All of those nuances for hospitality are often those things that from the outside looking in at retail, for example, we don't recognize. But the places that truly stand out are the ones that do recognize it and do it so good and so effortlessly and with such precision that they actually go unnoticed. And so it becomes what you feel, not what you see, that makes you want to go back.
Do you believe that multisensory experience design from a manufacturing perspective will become more important and more relevant in the cigar industry? And secondly, what you just described and what we were just discussing, would you say that's the quintessential method for survival for the brick and mortar to stay relevant against the booming online, to deliver those experiences that you just cannot replicate otherwise?
So the first question was the multi-sensory development. Is that the path forward? I think we can all agree that the greatest art is created by artists. And that's done naturally with the eye and hand of an artist. Now, you can study the methodology of every great artist and create an incredible algorithm that can somehow connect to a machine that can replicate every single facet of that artist 1,000 times. But the fact is that it does not capture the emotion. It doesn't capture the artist's breakfast. It doesn't capture the artist's mood or whether it was sunny that day. It misses the things that the artist was feeling when the art was being created. And I think as consumers, disciplined consumers, you can see the difference. My belief is that within premium cigars, yes, the emphasis and the embracing of the multi-sensory, the way it tastes, the way it feels, and the way it makes you feel will become more and more important. But I also believe that some of the largest companies will probably put large teams assigned to identify and study exactly how to do that the best way and roll it out. And I think they will probably miss unless they have an artist who can ultimately do it. Your second question was the future of brick and mortar. I've been fortunate to be on a few panels and lead a few discussions about excellence in retail. And what I spend the majority of my time sharing is my experience in exactly what we just talked about. Every retail store in the United States of America is selling, by and large, the same thing. And so my challenge to every brick and mortar store is, what do you offer in your place that a consumer cannot achieve while sitting on the toilet? Whatever those things are what will continue to set you apart. There is nothing that I want that I can't buy while seated on a toilet. I could buy a car, I can buy a house, I can buy cigars, I can buy wine, I can buy anything seated on my toilet. Easier and faster than getting in my car and driving to a store. That means that the moment I walk into a store, I'm opting in for something different. And if you don't deliver something different from the moment I walk in, you will lose to the internet and me on my toilet.
Marwan, you had a question for quite some time, so apologies for the short wait, but I'm glad.
No worries. How are you, buddy? All well? Long time.
Great to see
Mike,
you.
great. Michael, good to see you. Thank you for a beautiful session.
Thank you for watching.
I'm watching you all the way from Dubai, so more international than ever the sessions are.
I love, it's on my bucket list to go.
You're the most welcome. Well, back in the days when we used to board planes and travel, I visited your shop and it was a beautiful experience.
Amazing.
So actually, my question was about regarding brick and mortar, but you answered half of it anyway. My question is, I mean, your cigars like made by Quesada, Plasencia, etc. Will you continue working with these guys going forward? Are you trying to identify like a one-stop shop for your lineup, or are you going to continue doing the same?
For me, one of the points of differentiation that I am most proud of is our diversity. We manufacture premium cigars in the 3 leading countries that manufacture premium cigars for the American market: Nicaragua, Honduras, and Dominican Republic, with partners that I believe are among the best in those countries: Quesada in Dominican Republic, Plasencia in Nicaragua, and the Davidoff factory in Honduras that used to be owned by the Aero family. When I look at the portfolio of products we offer, the oldest products are 3 of our Metropolitan blends: the Metropolitan Connecticut and Maduro, which is manufactured by Quesada in Dominican since 1995, and the Host, which has been manufactured in Honduras, previously by Aero family, now by Davidoff, since 1994. If our job, our responsibility is to deliver consistent product year after year after year, despite the challenges of crop differentials, despite the challenges of shipping, despite all the challenges that exist in trying to maintain consistency, the fact is those products have grown every year since the year they were released. And the only reason why is because they have been so good and so consistent that consumers around the world have depended on them. And so why on earth would I ever dream of moving that production from the very people who have taken that responsibility so personally? So our plan for the former Nat Sherman International brands is to restore those brands back to market with their previously existing blends, which can only be achieved by bringing them to market with their previous manufacturing partners. And the great news is that our manufacturing partners are almost as excited about this future as I am. And so everyone has expressed unwavering commitment to restore them. For Ferio Tego, for our initial release, it will be a 2-blend, 1 size each release. And one will be manufactured by Quesada and one will be manufactured by Plasencia. There's no better way to launch that product than by leaning on the partners that have been there to support me personally since 2011 and have supported Nat Sherman for the decades before. Moving forward, I'm certainly eager to and open to look for other opportunities to work with other manufacturers that I admire and that I think we could do something fun and exciting together. But first things first, the partnership with Quesada and Plasencia and Davidoff is unwavering.
Just quick follow-up on these guys. So each factory have their own master blender, they have their own profile. How does it work technically with you from blending cigars and working with these guys? How do you just blend the cigar just by you and your team, or will you work closely with their team? How does it work technically on that front?
It's been a process that's evolved. So when I think to when we started, Marwan, early on, so there's always 2 jobs to do. One job is to create new products. The second job is to maintain old products. I would argue it's the second job that is actually more difficult than the first. Creating a new blend is not an easy thing to do. Maintaining it for 20 years without you noticing that anything has changed is infinitely more difficult to do. The maintenance work is work that is really driven by the factory teams, and then we contribute and give feedback and make sure that we agree that we are in line with the sort of consistent trajectory of that blend over time. When it comes to new products, it depends on the intention. So I'll give you an example. In 2019, we launched 3 limited editions, 2 from Dominican, 1 from Nicaragua. Those blends were decided from a portfolio of blends that had been achieved over time, meaning every visit, we try something new, we blend something new, we take a timeless prestige, we put a Maduro wrapper on it, broadleaf, and smoke it just for entertainment to see what happens. It usually sucks. We write down that it sucks, and then we never repeat that mistake again. But sometimes through that process, you identify something that's quite interesting, and then you start following that path. How do you make it better? How do you make it better? How do you make it better until you get to something that's great with absolutely nothing to do with it? And so those become some of this what I consider like my gold bars in the bank, where when there is an opportunity and the right time to bring something to market, we can look back at some of those prototypes and say, okay, which one would be great? Let's re-engage that prototype. Let's make it again. Let's tweak it again, and then let's go. So in restoring all of the previously manufactured Nat Sherman International brands, Metropolitan and Timeless first, that is the work of the factories to basically pick up where they left off. They have the tobaccos, they know the blends, they just made them a year ago. So being able to restore those back to true will be largely their responsibility, with our checking in, reviewing, and agreeing that they are unchanged and perfect as they were before. For Ferio Tego, that is more of the creative from scratch. But the good news is I still have gold bars in the safes of each of those factories of blends that I've developed over time for fun. And so part of what we did back starting in really July, when we announced that we didn't successfully transact and that we had to close the business, was I re-engaged with these factories with the prospect of Ferio Tego to start digging back out those blends, and then basically to each factory, because I couldn't travel, say, in a 6x50, this is the blend I want. This wrapper, this binder, this percentage and proportion of these tobaccos for filler. Both factories send back, taste and review, make these modifications, manufacturer, send to review, and back and forth until we finally identified the perfect expression for each of the Ferio Tego experiences, and now we're in production.
Excellent.
Hi, I have a question. Good afternoon. Sorry about the noise. I'll try not to take too much time. I'm going out on a limb with this question because I'm just tiptoeing into the world of luxury. I'm sporting Forever 21. So in terms of in terms of luxury, how much do you feel like is just personal taste? Like people say wine is very subjective, and like when you reach a point of quality of a product, how much do you think it comes down to what is sort of known and accepted as everyone knows this is great brand, I'm showing it because everyone knows it's great, versus just what you personally like yourself?
So that was Brian, right, that asked that, I think. Yep. I'm really glad you asked the question because it also kind of hits on what we were talking about earlier with Roxana. Brand is a driver oftentimes for brag, particularly in luxury. But when I see your bragging of brand, for me, there's absolutely nothing luxurious about that experience. I'm just seeing you post about it. To me, that's not luxury. More importantly, and this also speaks to Rox's point, luxury is not an item in the absence of time. Time is what makes luxury luxury. And allow me to apply my own background to that. I grew up in a small town, which I mentioned at the start. I never saw a Mercedes-Benz in my town. I learned later that that was supposed to be luxury. I didn't understand why there was a weird car with a peace sign on it. That didn't register as luxury to me because no one told me it was supposed to be, right? Luxury was the fact that you had a car, and more luxury if all four doors were the same color. That was even more luxury, right? I had never seen a Rolex. So the value of luxury timepiece was meaningless to me until I got to New York, and I only learned then that there were these new levels. But in reality, luxury for me growing up was the watch that glowed. That was luxury. If your watch didn't glow, well, then that was below the indiglow that my grandfather had. That was luxury. Luxury is your perception and value of your time with the product. Wine is luxury regardless of brand. When you can celebrate life and pour a glass of wine, I don't care what you paid for it. That is a moment of luxury because there are many without wine. There are many that cannot afford cigars. And so the moment that you enjoy one, you are experiencing luxury, and the time that you're investing in it is luxury. The counterpart to that time is the time making it and the time invested from raw material to cash. And that's where you start to get into some of the economics for why a product is considered luxury in the absence of your time invested in it. Meaning, if a cigar is $40, one better be able to explain why. But if the answer is that wrapper is 12 years old, this filler is 9 years old, 11 years old, 13 years old, these were made 3 years ago and aged for 3 years. Now I can equate time to those economics. That's investment of time in manufacturing. Why is a watch more expensive? The value of the ingredient and the time, or the mechanics, the jewels, whatever it takes, right? The raw cost of those, plus the time that a man sat there with tweezers and a monocle assembling this watch by hand. Now you've got the back end investment of time to make it, and then the front end of time for you to enjoy it. And for me, luxury can exist separately on either one of those measurement sticks. So you're wearing Forever 21. There is a huge population that is not wearing clothing at all. And I can remember, as I've grown in the spirit, in the world of menswear, where I could only afford a certain type of suit, but you damn well better be sure that when I put on that suit, I didn't feel inferior to someone who had a handmade suit, because I didn't know you made suits by hand. What did I know? I went to the store and I bought the suit. That's it. And the moment I bought it, I felt great, until the moment I knew there was something else. And all of a sudden I was made to feel like the thing I was proud to own today is shit compared to what somebody else owns. And for me, that is the curse of brand and luxury, because all of a sudden you are taking something that is meaningless and you are applying a value to that without taking into consideration the way I value and evaluate. And so I would say, Brian, that do not allow yourself to go down a rabbit hole of evaluating whether you like something or not based on what others are bragging about. Because I can assure you, the people who are bragging about their brands are not only consuming those brands. They've just fallen victim to only wanting to show the luxury and not showing the fact that they've got a car with 4 different colored doors in their driveway. And that really is the most dangerous piece of social media, that it is absent of authenticity. I mean, Reinhardt, you mentioned my social platform earlier, and then I've established a good one. Sure, I've got 20,000 followers, but in the landscape of social media, 20,000 is nothing compared to the hundreds of thousands and the millions. But what you see in mine is me. They're not ads. It's not placed. And so I look at my troop of 23,000 followers, and I am more proud of having developed a network of 23,000 people who actually give a shit about what I'm smoking or what I'm drinking or where I'm traveling. That means more to me than having 100,000 followers of people who are only engaged because I've decided to go down some filtered rabbit hole of luxury that is not rooted in any sense of reality. That was a super long answer, Brian, but hopefully it...
That was great. Thank you. That was a great answer. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much. I relate a lot. I grew up in Montana. Luxury is a pickup truck. So thank you.
Brian,
Cheers.
I was born in Billings.
Oh, really? No way.
Small world getting smaller. Yep. And I lived...
Oh, I grew up in Hamilton, an hour south of Missoula.
I lived in Wolf Point, which is an Indian reservation up, I think, north of Billings, when my father was ROTC physician. So again, you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't assume that just because there's suits and ties doesn't mean that there's a whole lot of authenticity and more to that story. So I would stick to you.
Yeah.
Find the things that you love, enjoy them because you love them, and establish your own reasons why. And don't buy into the bullshit of luxury.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, Billings was a big town for me when I was a kid. Cool.
Brian, always a pleasure to have you, and I couldn't be more grateful and happy about what we were fortunate to hear and share with you today during this wonderful session. And I would love you to be able to read some of the wonderful comments of people over on Facebook, and the gratitude that they have been expressing, and all the wonderful insights that they have been taken from this conversation. And I'm always intrigued when during some of your lives you talk about the body in the cigar. And to me, as for a lot of people, it's probably misleading, but as with wine or spirits, the body is really the depth and the weight that you feel on the palate. And that's how I feel about this conversation as well. It's got a lot of body, and this has been certainly one of the most insightful and yeah, just full-bodied conversations that I was honored to share. And I want to personally thank you for the way you express yourself and the way you talk about the cigar world in general, because you're truly an ambassador for this wonderful world that we all got to appreciate and love.
I appreciate being on. I've really, I've enjoyed watching your programs over the last several months. And, you know, you are obviously a relative newcomer to this industry, but in reality, I'm entering my 22nd year and I'm a newcomer in the totality of this industry. I think often once time is spent and someone comes in behind, we can often feel the threat emotion more than what we should feel, which is the embrace emotion. And I think what you have brought to our industry in a relatively short amount of time, it has obviously been embraced by our industry, and that is an obvious credit to your graciousness, your authenticity, your humility and willingness to learn and present a platform for other people to share. This industry is better because of this. So bravo to you, and to everyone that chimes in and that watches, engages and comments and asks questions. You know, it goes back to the question that you asked me earlier. Are we overdoing the romance, and are we overdoing and overemphasizing the passion? There is no way one could overemphasize passion. It's at the core of everything we do, whether we make a living doing it or whether we find time to enjoy it. It is everything that makes this hobby worth doing. So bravo to you, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. And I'm an easy guy to find, so just Michael Herklots on any platform you can think of, most of them. Please, you know, follow me, send me a message. I generally try and be pretty good to respond, and although things are a bit hectic these next couple of months, so I'll do my best. But thank you to everyone, and I look forward to you all enjoying some delicious Ferio Tego cigars soon.
What a wonderful way to end this conversation. Thank you for the very kind words as well. And from deepest of hearts, nothing but the very best for your new path and the journey with Ferio Tego, as well as all the very best and lots of health for your family. And I can't wait to sit down and have a cigar with you soon, whether it's via Zoom or hopefully in person. I'm looking forward to it.
I'll take either one, Reinhard. You just tell me when.
Thank you so much. All the very best.